Good evening and welcome back to the broadcast. We appreciate you tuning in as we continue our relentless pursuit of the unvarnished truth, standing firm for dignity and heightened awareness across the African continent. Before we dive deep, make sure to hit that subscribe button, share this broadcast with your network, and sound off in the comments section below, because what we are covering tonight goes way beyond standard reporting. We are talking about absolute clarity on a situation that has been shrouded in mystery. The explosive story we are revisiting today didn't break yesterday, and it didn't happen last week. This narrative actually began unfolding months ago. So, the burning question is, why are we circling back to this headline right now? That is the million-dollar question. And the answer is straightforward. Fresh confessions and bombshell revelations have finally corroborated what millions across the continent suspected but lacked the hard evidence to prove until this very moment. When you actually sit down and piece this geopolitical puzzle together correctly, the entire picture becomes crystal clear, and we finally understand why the ECOWAS bloc has been operating in a state of sheer panic, applying immense pressure and lashing out in anger. Rewind a few months and you will remember how the entire region was sent reeling when Julius Maada Bio, the president of Sierra Leone and current ECOWAS chairman, dropped a rhetorical bombshell that shook the diplomatic world. He went on the record declaring that the nations of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger had absolutely no choice but to return to the ECOWAS fold whether they wanted to or not. Now, why did this ultimatum catch so many observers completely off guard? It was because his tone was completely devoid of brotherhood. He wasn't sounding like a mediator, and he certainly didn't sound like a leader looking to broker peace. Instead, he sounded like a commander barking orders. He was demanding immediate elections and insisting on a forced return to what the regional bloc defines as democracy. He was essentially demanding that the Alliance of Sahel States, the AES, scrap their entire independent roadmap and fall back in line. Back then, this triggered a second critical question across the African diaspora. Why is ECOWAS hitting the panic button? Where is this sudden urgency and hostility coming from? The truth wasn't immediately visible, but fast forward to today and the fog is lifting. This inevitably led to yet another inquiry. Why would a regional body take such an aggressive stance against sovereign nations that claim they are simply trying to secure the safety of their own citizens? According to political analysts, the root cause is pure, unadulterated fear. For years, ECOWAS has been failing, quietly masking its incompetence behind closed-door summits and endless bureaucratic press releases. However, the sudden rise in solidarity of the Sahel Alliance has ripped the curtain away and exposed those systemic failures for the world to see. Think about it. When terror groups were ravaging villages across Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, what was the response? They scheduled meetings. When innocent lives were being lost, what was the action plan? They issued strongly worded memos. When borders were burning and entire communities were crumbling, what was the topic of discussion in the capital cities? They were talking about ballot boxes and democratic processes. This brings us right back to the core issue. Why did the nations of the Sahel finally decide to walk away from the bloc? The motivation is undeniable. They prioritized national security over diplomatic speeches. They chose sovereignty over seeking approval from foreign entities. They made the hard choice to put the safety of their population first. And look at the aftermath. Did they crumble into chaos, as the critics predicted? Absolutely not. On the contrary, military coordination tightened up. You saw soldiers working in sync like never before, and we actually witnessed a reduction in terrorist pressure in key conflict zones. Slowly but surely, hope began to return to these communities. And that reality leads us to the next pivotal question we need to ask. Who stands to gain if the Sahel Alliance falls apart? It certainly isn't the African people who benefit from that kind of failure. The real beneficiaries are the entities that have lost control, foreign powers watching their influence evaporate, and special interests losing their easy access to valuable natural resources. Their direct political leverage weakened, so when they couldn't apply pressure directly, they routed it through the regional mechanism of ECOWAS. That is precisely why a growing number of citizens believe the organization has been weaponized as a tool for external agendas rather than serving as the authentic voice of the people. When Chairman Bio made those aggressive remarks months ago, the urgency didn't quite land with the public. But now we have to ask the next critical question. What exactly changed on the ground? And why is the entire continent suddenly re-examining those specific comments today? The answer is buried in the recent bombshell confessions from Burkina Faso's Captain Ibrahim Traoré, alongside statements attributed to the former leader Paul-Henri Damiba. Captain Traoré recently pulled back the curtain, revealing that there was a foiled coup attempt just last month on January 3rd, 2026. Now, was this just a random act of mutiny? According to Traoré, absolutely not. This was a calculated, orchestrated operation with significant backing from external forces. We are talking about high-level espionage, deep betrayal, and complex coordination, which forces us to ask who exactly were the players involved in this plot. Based on the explosive revelations and confessions linked to Damiba, it appears the diplomatic visits made by Julius Maada Bio to Burkina Faso months ago were anything but innocent. While Bio was on the ground in Burkina Faso, he was publicly claiming he was there to show solidarity and concern for his so-called brother Ibrahim Traoré. He spun a narrative about caring deeply for the nation and its citizens, speaking with a soft, diplomatic tone, and presenting himself as a trusted ally. But if Damiba's confession holds water, every single one of those words was a fabrication. So, what was the real objective behind Bio's trip to Ouagadougou? According to the intelligence provided by Damiba, that visit had zero to do with friendship or humanitarian concern. It was a reconnaissance mission, pure and simple espionage. The allegation is that Julius Maada Bio was there to systematically study and map out Burkina Faso's defense architecture and security protocols. He needed to understand the organizational structure of the military figure, out the inner workings of Traoré's administration, and identify vulnerabilities where a strategic strike could be launched later. This brings us to a terrifying realization and a powerful question. If this confession is accurate, what does it say about the true nature of ECOWAS and its recent maneuvers? It implies that the relentless pressure coming from the bloc was never really about upholding democracy. It was always about exerting control. It was a calculated effort to kneecap the Sahel leaders and manufacture instability just so the international community could turn around later and claim that these independent governments were destined to fail. So, the burning question dominating the news cycle tonight is simply this. Why are we getting confirmation on this story right at this specific moment? The answer lies in the evidence. This admission serves as the missing puzzle piece that aligns terrifyingly well with those earlier acts of intimidation from ECOWAS. It proves beyond a reasonable doubt that the hostility was calculated and those diplomatic demands were far from impartial. It validates the theory that a sophisticated operation was being orchestrated in the shadows, aiming for massive destabilization. But the critical question remains, did this clandestine plot actually hit its mark? The answer is a definitive no. The attempted takeover crumbled completely. Why? Because you cannot buy the loyalty of a patriot. The military stood their ground, and the civilian population rallied behind their leadership with unwavering resolve. As the dust settles, the unvarnished truth is finally trickling out, forcing a pivot to a critical inquiry that is resonating in town halls and street corners across the African continent. We have to ask ourselves, what validity does a democratic system hold if it turns a blind eye to national security, ignores mass starvation, and strips citizens of their basic human dignity? Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the leader of Burkina Faso, did not mince words when he addressed this head-on, famously stating that you cannot serve democracy on a dinner plate. People cannot eat abstract political concepts. Families need meals on the table, they need safety in their neighborhoods, and they need peace of mind. That raw, unfiltered truth has struck a chord and ignited a fire in the hearts of millions from the Atlantic to the Red Sea. Now critics and analysts predicted absolute anarchy when the Alliance of Sahel States broke away from the ECOWAS bloc. But did the sky fall as they claimed it would? Absolutely not. On the contrary, we are seeing a surge in regional collaboration, a sharp decline in foreign meddling and skyrocketing national confidence, a shift that is terrifying to foreign powers who thrive on African instability. So how do we define the Sahel Alliance in 2026? It has evolved far beyond a mere treaty or political pact. It stands today as a beacon of defiance, a renaissance of consciousness, and absolute proof that African nations possess the agency to carve out their own destiny. This brings us to the strategic blunder of the opposition. Why did ECOWAS choose the path of fury and aggression rather than sitting down at the negotiating table for a civil dialogue? It is simple political science. They were losing their grip. Coercion became the default setting because their confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by a palpable sense of fear. And when you look at the introduction of espionage and regime change tactics, the motive is clear, entrenched. Special interests simply could not stomach the idea of a self-sufficient fortified Sahel region. Tonight, the consensus on the street is shifting rapidly. The ultimate question is being asked, is ECOWAS acting as a neutral arbiter? And the overwhelming response from the public is a resounding negative. Observers are seeing a bureaucracy dedicated to preserving the status quo and institutional power rather than protecting human lives. The logic is sound. If the organization truly prioritized the people, counter-terrorism would have been day one's agenda. Their forces would have been on the front lines shielding rural villages from attacks. They would have been standing shoulder to shoulder with the vulnerable populations facing these insurgencies. But the reality is that they did not. And now as the Sahel Alliance flexes its muscles and gains momentum, the leadership at ECOWAS is looking increasingly compromised and exposed to the world. This context is exactly why the previous remarks from President Julius Maada Bio are resonating so heavily right now. Those weren't just empty soundbites for the press. That was a red alert. And look at what followed that warning: a campaign of intense diplomatic pressure, backstabbing intelligence operations, and a failed coup d'etat. But the scheme backfired because the populace remained vigilant. The facts have been laid bare. In 2026, the African geopolitical understanding is sharper than ever before. Citizens are connecting the dots between isolated events and recalling the rhetoric used against them. They are deconstructing the motives. It is becoming crystal clear that the panic we saw from ECOWAS leadership months ago had nothing to do with maintaining regional unity. It was entirely about the terror of losing administrative control. The alliance has drawn a line in the sand regarding sovereignty, making it clear that their independence is not up for debate. We expect the external pressure to ramp up and the smear campaigns to intensify. But make no mistake, the African people, and indeed history itself, are watching with a magnifying glass. Future generations will judge who stood in solidarity with the continent and who conspired to keep it on its knees. This narrative from a few months back isn't ancient history. It is the smoking gun. It serves as the corroborating evidence backing up the explosive disclosures made later by Captain Ibrahim Traoré regarding foreign interference. It proves that this fight is visceral and ongoing. It demonstrates that the future of Africa is being forged right now in real time through acts of bravery, unyielding resistance, and an insistence on the truth.